Have you ever heard about Nimrod in the Bible? Few people truly know who he was, a man who wanted to be not only powerful, but greater than God himself. After the flood, when humanity was beginning to reorganize, this ambitious leader appeared, the grandson of Ham and great-grandson of Noah. Nimrod was the first man to form an empire and to build cities that became symbols of pride and rebellion, such as Babel. His name was remembered not for courage or wisdom, but for his audacity in defying the Creator. While many sought to serve God, Nimrod wanted to be worshipped as a god. He gathered peoples, built fortresses, and started a plan that would change the course of humanity: the construction of the Tower of Babel, a monument to human arrogance. The Bible describes him as the first great ruler who united people under one purpose, but not to glorify the Lord, rather to prove they could live without him. Nimrod's heart was consumed by pride. His power blinded him to the point that he believed he could reach heaven with his own hands. This rebellious attitude made his name a symbol of idolatry and defiance against God. But what led this man to such arrogance? Why did he decide to fight against the very Creator? And what was the fate of the one who dared to place himself above the Most High? Get ready to know one of the most impressive and enigmatic stories in the Scriptures, the story of Nimrod, the man who rose against God and paid a high price for it. Before we begin, don't forget to leave your like on the video so this message can reach more people and help spread the knowledge of God's Word. After the Great Flood, a new phase began for humanity. The waters had already receded, and Noah's families began to spread across the earth, obeying God's command: be fruitful and multiply. It was a time of new beginnings, of hope and rebuilding. The world had been cleansed from the wickedness that once existed, and the descendants of Noah had the chance to live differently, with obedience and gratitude to the Creator. Among Noah's sons was Ham, who had a son named Cush. And from Cush was born Nimrod, a man who would leave a deep mark on human history. Nimrod was the great-grandson of Noah and grew up in a family that knew God's power and justice. But over time, new generations began to drift away from faith. The memory of the flood became distant, and the human heart once again filled with pride and rebellion. In this context, Nimrod stood out. From a young age, he showed strength, courage, and great leadership skills. People admired and followed him. The Bible calls him the first mighty one on the earth, Genesis chapter 10, verse 8, an expression that goes far beyond physical strength. He was the first man to exercise dominion over others, to create a government, to impose his will. But the problem lay in the purpose behind it. Nimrod did not use his power to serve God or protect the people. He used it to control, conquer, and exalt himself. Thus began a new kind of leadership among men, one built on human strength and ambition, not on obedience and dependence on the Lord. Nimrod became the symbol of this new spirit, the spirit of self-sufficiency and the pursuit of power without God. While many of Noah's descendants still sought to follow the ways of God, Nimrod chose a different path. He believed that his strength and intelligence could lead him to greatness. His very name, which in Hebrew is linked to the idea of rebellion, already revealed who he was, a man determined to challenge the limits set by the Creator. Nimrod did not want merely to live in the world made by God. He wanted to rule over it. Thus, he became the symbol of the shift between obedience to God and the pursuit of human power. He was the first leader to attempt to build an empire independent of divine will. People were impressed by his courage and leadership. At that time, there were no kings or organized nations, and Nimrod began to gather families and tribes under his command. He promised protection, strength, and progress. To many, he seemed like a hero, someone capable of giving direction in a time of uncertainty after the flood. But behind that image of a strong leader grew a heart full of pride and ambition. Nimrod wanted to unite the world, but not to glorify God. He wanted to build his own name and a kingdom where the Creator would have no place. As time passed, those who followed him began to drift away from the teachings left by Noah. Respect and reverence for God were replaced by confidence in their own strength. The memory of the flood, which should have served as a warning, was forgotten. Pride took the place of humility, and the pursuit of power became the new ideal. Thus, the one who should have recognized God's goodness and mercy became the builder of a civilization centered on man, a society that exalted its own name instead of the name of the Lord. This was how Nimrod founded the first empire mentioned in the Bible. He created a new kind of society centered on human power, where authority no longer came from God, but from an earthly ruler. Nimrod was the first to turn leadership into domination and influence into tyranny. The Bible describes him as a mighty hunter before the Lord, Genesis chapter 10, verse 9. At first glance, this phrase may seem like a compliment, highlighting his strength and courage. But the true meaning is very different. The text does not speak of a hero, but of a man who used his strength to challenge God himself. Nimrod did not hunt only animals, he hunted people, controlled and subdued nations. With his cunning and power, he conquered and imposed his will, becoming the first leader to build a government based on force rather than obedience to the Creator. The expression, "before the Lord," shows that God saw everything Nimrod did, but it also indicates that his actions went against divine will. Nimrod placed himself as a rival to the Most High, seeking glory and power for himself. While the descendants of Noah obeyed God's command and spread across the earth, Nimrod did the opposite. He gathered people and lands under his rule. Thus was born the first human empire, a kingdom where man occupied the place that belonged to God. The same spirit of rebellion that had led the world to destruction before the flood returned to manifest itself, now in a more organized and dangerous form. Nimrod was not merely an ambitious leader. He represented the beginning of an era in which humanity began to trust in its own strength, openly defying the authority of the Creator. As the years passed, Nimrod became a man known and feared. His fame grew quickly and reached distant lands. Entire peoples heard about his power, his conquests, and the way he ruled over cities. Those who surrendered to him were incorporated into his kingdom. Those who resisted were defeated. Thus, through strength, strategy, and fear, Nimrod built a reputation that placed him above all men of his time. He became the first great ruler of humanity, a title earned through oppression and control. But his dominion went beyond armies and territories. Nimrod also changed the way people thought. Under his leadership, a new era began in which man placed himself at the center of everything. Humanity, which once depended on the Creator, began to trust only in itself. Nimrod replaced the altar of worship with thrones and walls, substituting faith in God with belief in human power. His idea spread rapidly, that man could achieve greatness on his own without needing God. This mindset would become the foundation of many empires that arose later, all built upon the same principle, the exaltation of man in place of the Lord. Over time, people began to see Nimrod almost as a god. His image as a victorious hunter became a symbol of leadership and authority. Many admired him, believing that his power represented progress and security. However, what seemed like advancement was, in reality, a great departure from God. The Lord had commanded men to spread across the earth, but Nimrod did the opposite. He gathered everyone around himself. He wanted an empire independent of divine will. And thus, little by little, the world began to follow in his footsteps, building a society founded on pride and disobedience. Nimrod's hunt was not merely physical, it was spiritual and political. He conquered people not with traps or spears, but with words and power. He won the loyalty of the people and diverted the worship that should have been given to God. Thus began organized idolatry, a system in which success and power became the new gods. With intelligence and ambition, Nimrod built a kingdom that exchanged divine authority for human exaltation. His tyranny was not only in military strength, but also in corrupting hearts, leading nations away from the true Creator. His fame crossed borders. Distant peoples heard of the great hunter, the man who dominated every land he entered. Some saw him as a hero and protector of humanity, a strong leader who brought order. Others saw him as an oppressor, driven by arrogance and a desire to control. But one thing was certain. With Nimrod was born the first human empire, and with it the first attempt to build a civilization without God at its center. Nimrod became the symbol of organized rebellion, the first to turn power into a tool of domination. The title Mighty Hunter before the Lord was not praise, but a warning. He hunted people not to lead them to God, but to draw them away from Him. His empire represented human pride taken to the extreme, a system that openly defied divine sovereignty. From Nimrod onward began the struggle that would run through all of biblical history, the conflict between the kingdoms of men and the kingdom of God. The power of Nimrod grew without limits. His influence spread everywhere, and humanity, instead of reflecting the glory of the Lord, began to bow before a man. The hunter before the Lord became the first tyrant in history, marking the beginning of an era in which power was placed above faith. And it was in this atmosphere of pride and rebellion that he began the greatest symbol of his arrogance: the construction of Babel, the heart of an empire created in direct defiance of the Most High God. Over time, the power and influence of Nimrod grew greatly. He strengthened his rule by founding several important cities. The Bible mentions 4 of them: Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, all located in the fertile region of Shinar, which would later be known as Babylon, Genesis chapter 10, verse 10. This area, rich in rivers and productive lands, became the cradle of the first human empire. And it was in Babel that Nimrod established the center of his power, transforming the city into a place of political, economic, and religious influence unlike anything ever seen before. Babel was not just any city. It was the representation of Nimrod's dreams. He built it to be the symbol of human greatness, a place where man took the place of God. Its temples, palaces, and grand constructions reflected a society that lived to exalt its own name. While God had commanded the peoples to spread across the earth, Nimrod did the opposite. He gathered everyone into a single territory with one purpose: to glorify man instead of the Creator. In that city, the focus was no longer to serve God, but to celebrate human strength and intelligence. Faith gave way to the pursuit of power. Nimrod became the face of this new ideology, a man who united nations, but at the cost of their freedom. Many admired him for bringing unity and progress, but that unity was built on domination and dependence. What seemed like development was, in truth, deception. Babel represented the beginning of a civilization that prospered in the eyes of the world, but drifted spiritually away from the Creator. It was the portrait of a humanity that, instead of raising altars to God, erected monuments to itself. Nimrod's ambition knew no limits. He did not want to be merely a king among men. He wanted to have control over everything, even over the will of God. Babel became the center of a system in which man placed himself in the position of the Creator. It was there that organized idolatry began, when people started to worship stars and false gods. The first temples dedicated to pagan deities arose, and with them began a worship completely separated from the true God. The unification achieved by Nimrod seemed like something magnificent. Different peoples with diverse languages and customs now spoke the same language and worked together toward the same goal. At first glance, this appeared to be a sign of progress and strength. But this unity, instead of bringing blessing, produced pride and rebellion. People began to believe that they could achieve anything without needing God. The unity became dangerous, for it was built upon human independence and arrogance. The spirit of Babel was the exaltation of man, not communion with the Creator. It was in this setting that the boldest and most rebellious project of that era was born: the construction of the Tower of Babel. Nimrod led the plan as the ultimate expression of his ambition. The tower was not merely a grand construction, it was a symbol of defiance, an attempt to reach heaven and occupy the place that belongs to God. It was humanity declaring, "We do not need the Lord." The Tower of Babel marked the highest point of human rebellion after the flood. Under Nimrod's command, everyone united with the same purpose: to challenge the Creator. In Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, it is written, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower, whose top reaches the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, so that we are not scattered over the face of the whole earth." These words reveal the heart of a people who had lost the fear of God. Nimrod, who already ruled over kingdoms and nations, now wanted to go further. He wanted to found a civilization built on human strength and glory, independent of the Lord. Babel became the center of Nimrod's great project. Thousands of workers produced bricks and raised a massive tower, believing they could reach the heavens. What seemed like a sign of progress and unity was, in reality, the reflection of human pride. Nimrod wanted an empire that did not depend on God, and the people followed him, believing they would find security and eternal fame. The tower symbolized self-sufficiency and idolatry. It was humanity's attempt to take the place of the Creator. The Bible says, "The Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men were building." Genesis chapter 11, verse 5. This shows that God observed everything that was happening. That unity, which could have been a blessing, turned into rebellion. Nimrod was not seeking the good of the people, but total power. His rule was political, military, and spiritual. He taught that man was the center of everything, and that idea would later become the foundation of the spirit of Babylon, the human system that always rises against God. Faced with such arrogance, God said, "The people are one, and they all have the same language, and this is only the beginning. Now nothing they plan will be impossible for them." Genesis chapter 11, verse 6. Then the Lord acted. He confused their languages so that people could no longer understand one another. Chaos spread. The workers who once cooperated could no longer communicate. The construction stopped. The great project that had seemed invincible collapsed simply because of the confusion of words. In a single moment, God showed that human power has limits. No work built to exalt man can stand without the approval of the Creator. The tower, symbol of human pride, became the eternal reminder that all greatness without God is destined to fall. The name Babel came to mean confusion, because it was there that human pride was broken by the action of God. The forced unity that Nimrod had created dissolved, and the peoples began to scatter over the earth, fulfilling the Creator's original plan. The empire that promised glory and stability ended in division. The man who wanted to reach heaven saw his power fall before the will of the Most High. The tower, which was meant to represent conquest and greatness, turned into ruins, an eternal reminder that God is sovereign over all. Babel became the first great symbol of human rebellion against God. It showed that every society built on pride and self-sufficiency is destined to fail. Nimrod tried to unite the peoples through strength and vanity, but God proved that true unity exists only under His authority. The confusion of languages was in fact an act of mercy, for it prevented humanity from plunging even deeper into sin. The unfinished tower became a monument to human limitation and divine supremacy. Thus ended the dream of Nimrod. The empire that had seemed indestructible dissolved into different peoples, languages, and cultures. Each new language served as a reminder that God's power stands above every human ambition. The Tower of Babel did not fall by war or disaster, but by the will of the Creator Himself, who showed that no one can reach heaven through pride. With the fall of Babel and the dispersion of the nations, Nimrod disappeared from the pages of the Bible, but his legacy remained alive. He is no longer mentioned directly, yet his influence stretched across the centuries. Nimrod became the symbol of all human systems that attempt to replace God and exalt human power. He represented the birth of a mindset that seeks personal glory instead of worshipping the Creator. His story ended in silence, but his example remains as a warning. Every greatness built without God ends in confusion, downfall, and oblivion. Ancient records and traditions tell that Nimrod's end was tragic. Although the Bible does not describe his death, Jewish writings and other ancient sources claim that it happened violently as a result of his arrogance and tyranny. Some traditions say that Nimrod was killed by his great-uncle Shem for defying God during the construction of the Tower of Babel. Other versions state that he was executed by his own mother, Semiramis, or even attacked by wild animals. There are also those who say that his death was a direct act of divine judgment. In any case, the man who had ruled kingdoms and spread fear among nations ended up defeated, a victim of the same pride that led him away from God. His story began with power and ended in destruction. The empire he had built with such strength collapsed quickly, and his earthly glory turned to dust. The remembrance he wanted to make eternal became a symbol of confusion and arrogance. Babel, the city founded by Nimrod, continued to represent the same spirit of rebellion. The region of Shinar, where it all began, would later become Babylon, a power that inherited not only the territory, but also Nimrod's same arrogant heart. Over the centuries, Babylon stood out as the center of idolatry, corruption, and opposition to God. The prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah called it the great proud city, the enemy of the people of the Lord. And much later, in the book of Revelation, Babylon reappears as the ultimate symbol of humanity's defiance against the Creator, the spiritual legacy of the rebellion that began with Nimrod. Nimrod was not merely a historical figure, but a spiritual symbol. He represents every human attempt to build a world without God, to seek power and fame without obedience to the Creator. His empire was the first example of a man-controlled system, strong and independent, that would later serve as a model for other kingdoms that also rose against God, such as Babylon, Assyria, and Rome. All of them, in some way, carried the same spirit of Nimrod, the exaltation of man above the Lord. Therefore, the story of Nimrod is not just an ancient account, but a warning valid for every era. The same pride that led to his downfall is the same that continues to destroy nations to this very day. After the flood, God had shown humanity the cost of disobedience, but Nimrod chose to defy the divine will. He led the people away from faith and closer to idolatry. The result was chaos, confusion, division, and destruction. No human power was able to prevent God's judgment. The confusion of languages was only the beginning of the end for an empire that was born out of pride and ended in oblivion. The lesson his story leaves is simple and eternal. Everything built without God is destined to fall. Kingdoms may rise and names may be remembered, but without the Lord's blessing, nothing endures. Nimrod tried to reach heaven by force and ended up lost among the ruins of his own pride. His life shows the destiny of all who choose to challenge divine authority. Those who are humble, who trust and obey God, are the ones who truly attain glory that never fades. While the name of Nimrod became a symbol of confusion, the name of the Lord continues to be exalted forever. Thus, the end of Nimrod is not just the downfall of a powerful man, it is a clear portrait of the conflict between human pride and God's dominion. He tried to unite the world around his own glory, but the Creator showed that true unity exists only under his authority. The empire of Nimrod disappeared, but the judgment that struck him remains a warning for all generations. There is no greatness outside the presence of God, and no human power can resist his will. Now, write in the comments if you already knew the story of Nimrod in the Bible. Share this video with more people. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. May God greatly bless your life.